The cargo manifest was dated November 3, 1987, and it listed 47 items. Crate of machine parts, 2 pallets of canned peaches, 1 roll of copper wire, and on line 31, written in blue ballpoint ink that had barely faded, a single entry that read, "Male child, 9, live freight, deliver to Cheyenne." Caleb Wren was 39 years old when he found that piece of paper. He was kneeling in 3 inches of standing water inside a Union Pacific railcar that had been buried under 6 feet of Wyoming topsoil for nearly 3 decades. The water smelled like iron and wet chalk. His knees ached against the rusted floor grating, and the flashlight in his left hand was dying, its beam turning the color of weak tea. But he could still read the manifest. He read line 31 4 times before his hands started shaking. He had not planned to be here. He had not planned much of anything since February, when the county assessor's office in Laramie had let him go after 11 years. Budget cuts, they told him. Nothing personal. They gave him a sheet cake from the grocery store bakery and the card signed by 9 people, 3 of whom had misspelled his name. By April, the apartment was gone. By May, his truck had a cracked head gasket he could not afford to fix. By June, Caleb Wren was sleeping in a storage unit on the edge of town, the kind with a rolling metal door that sounded like a gunshot every time he opened it. He kept a sleeping bag on top of a foam pad and a battery-powered lantern that attracted moths through the gap at the bottom of the door. He ate gas station burritos that tasted like cardboard and hot sauce. He showered at the truck stop on Route 30, paying $2 for 8 minutes of lukewarm water. The letter from his uncle arrived at his P.O. box on a Tuesday in late July. Not a real letter. A printed notice from a law office in Rawlins. His uncle Macon, his mother's brother, had died of a stroke 3 weeks earlier in a VA hospital in Casper. The estate, such as it was, consisted of a 40-acre parcel of scrubland east of the Wind River Range, a 1994 Ford flatbed, and, according to the lawyer's dry phrasing, various structures and improvements of indeterminate condition. Caleb had not spoken to his Uncle Macon in 20 years. Had not spoken to anyone in his mother's family since his mother had dropped him at the Greyhound station in Rock Springs when he was 9 years old, pressed a $20 bill into his palm, and told him to give the bus driver the envelope with his father's address on it. She smelled like Virginia Slims and cherry cough drops. She did not cry. She said, "You'll be fine, Cal," and she walked back to a brown Oldsmobile where a man Caleb did not recognize was waiting in the driver's seat. The bus driver, a heavy woman with a mole on her chin, had looked at the envelope, looked at Caleb and said, "Cheyenne?" Caleb had nodded. That was the last time anyone in his mother's family had acknowledged he existed. Until now, apparently Uncle Macon had remembered him in his will. Nobody else wanted 40 acres of dust and sage in the middle of nowhere. His mother had died in 2011. His 2 cousins, Darla and Wayne, had already taken the few things worth taking. A rifle collection, a set of rodeo belt buckles, $1,100 from a savings account. They left Caleb the land because the land was worth less than the back taxes owed on it. He hitchhiked to Rawlins in early August, signed the papers. The lawyer, a tired man with reading glasses on a beaded chain, slid the deed across the desk and said, "Congratulations, you now owe Fremont County $1,400. Then he paused and added, "Your uncle left a note." Just a sticky note, actually. He handed Caleb a small yellow square of paper. On it, in shaky handwriting, were 5 words. "Check the East Field, boy." That was all. Caleb drove the inherited flatbed out to the property on a Saturday morning. The truck burned oil so badly that a blue cloud followed him the entire way. The land was exactly what he expected. Flat, brown, spotted with sagebrush and cheatgrass. A collapsed chicken coop sat near what had once been a driveway. The house, if you could call it that, was a single wide trailer from the 1970s with a caved-in roof and walls the color of tobacco stain. Pack rats had built a civilization inside. He could hear them scratching when he pressed his ear to the aluminum siding. Theo Griffithan etched intly, etched intly, etched intly, etched intly, etched intly, toward a dry creek bed. Caleb walked it twice, scanning for anything unusual. On his third pass, late in the afternoon when the shadows were long, he noticed something. A slight depression in the earth, rectangular, maybe 50 feet long and 10 feet wide. The sagebrush growing over it was younger than the surrounding brush, shorter, with thinner stems. The soil was a slightly different color, more gray than brown, like fill dirt that had been brought in from somewhere else. He came back the next day with a shovel he found in the chicken coop. The handle was cracked and wrapped in electrical tape. He started digging at the eastern edge of the depression. 3 inches down, the shovel hit something metal. A dull clang that he felt in his wrists. It took him 4 days to uncover the roof of the railcar. 14 feet of riveted steel, painted Union Pacific yellow under decades of corrosion. The thing was buried at an angle, tilted about 15 degrees, as if someone had dug a trench, rolled it in, and covered it up. The effort that would have taken was staggering. Heavy equipment. Weeks of work, all to hide a single railroad car in the middle of a field that nobody cared about. He found the door on the north side, a sliding freight door, sealed shut with a padlock so rusted it crumbled when he hit it with a rock. The door itself was jammed. He spent an entire afternoon working a pry bar into the gap, leveraging it inch by inch, the metal screaming against metal in a sound that set his teeth on edge. When it finally slid open, a rush of stale air hit him in the face. It smelled like machine oil and old paper and something faintly sweet, like grain that had gone to dust. Inside, the rail car was dry except for the standing water near the door where rain had seeped through the excavation. The ceiling was low. Caleb is 6'1", and he had to duck. His flashlight swept across wooden crates stacked against the far wall, their lids nailed shut. A metal filing cabinet, olive green, military surplus. A workbench bolted to the floor with a vise still attached. And hanging from a nail on the wall, a clipboard with a sheaf of papers held by a rusted spring clip. The cargo manifest. He read it standing in that water, his boots slowly soaking through. The manifest was a standard railroad freight document, the kind he had seen 1,000 times growing up in Wyoming, where trains were as common as wind. Shipper was listed as Consolidated Freight Solutions, Ogden, Utah. Destination was Cheyenne. Date, November 3, 1987. And there on line 31, his life reduced to cargo. Male child 9, live freight, delivered to Cheyenne. Caleb sat down on a crate. The wood groaned but held. He sat there for a long time in the dark, listening to water drip somewhere behind him, trying to understand what he was looking at. He had always known his mother gave him away. He had always assumed it was simple abandonment. A woman who did not want to be a mother anymore. A bus ticket and a prayer. But this manifest suggested something else entirely, something transactional. Someone had paid to have him moved, like a piece of equipment, like a crate of canned peaches. He opened the filing cabinet the next morning after he had driven back to town, sat in a McDonald's parking lot for 3 hours staring at the steering wheel, and returned at dawn. The filing cabinet contained 4 drawers. The top 3 held folders organized by year, from 1979 to 1991. Inside each folder were more manifests, more shipping documents, more cargo lists. And scattered through them on 14 separate occasions across 12 years were entries for live freight. Children, always listed by age and gender. Never by name. Male child, 6. Female child, 11. Male child, 4. Delivered to Denver. Female child, 7. Delivered to Salt Lake. The bottom drawer held something different, a leather satchel, cracked and stiff, containing a ledger book. The ledger was handwritten in 2 different hands. One was small and precise in accountant's handwriting. The other was loose, almost careless, with ink blots and crossed-out entries. The precise hand recorded dates, amounts, and what appeared to be code names. Bluebird, Sparrow, Bus, Finch. The loose hand recorded locations and physical descriptions. Brown hair, green eyes, approximately 40 pounds. Blonde, missing front teeth, scar on left knee. Caleb understood, with a coldness that started in his stomach and radiated outward, that his Uncle Macon had buried this railcar not to hide a crime, but to preserve the evidence of one. He drove to the Fremont County Sheriff's Office that afternoon. The deputy at the front desk was a young woman with her hair in a tight bun, who listened to his story with an expression that moved from polite skepticism to something much more focused. She asked him to wait. She made a phone call. 40 minutes later, a detective named Garza arrived, a compact man in his 50s, with gray temples and a quiet way of sitting that made Caleb feel like he was being studied. Garza drove out to the property with him. Caleb watched Garza climb into the railcar, watched him read the manifest, watched him open the filing cabinet. Garza did not speak for a long time. When he climbed back out, his boots muddy, his expression had changed. He looked at Caleb and said, "How long has this been here?" But Carby said he did not know exactly, since 1991 at least, based on the last entries in the ledger. Garza made more phone calls. Within a week, the property was roped off with yellow tape. FBI agents arrived from Denver. They wore windbreakers and moved with a kind of purposeful efficiency that made the local deputies stand straighter. They brought ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs that sniffed the dry creek bed methodically while their handlers marked spots with small orange flags. They did not find bodies. They found something Caleb had not expected. More rail cars, 2 additional ones, buried deeper farther west. One contained clothing, children's clothing, neatly folded in vacuum-sealed bags. Shoes in rows by size. The other contained records. Thousands of pages, adoption papers, most of them forged, court documents with fabricated signatures, payment receipts from families across 5 states. It was a pipeline. That was the word the lead FBI agent used, a woman named Chen with short hair and no discernible accent. A pipeline for children, operating from the late 70s through at least 1991. Children taken from families who were too poor, too addicted, or too desperate to fight back. Mothers who were told their children would have a better life. Fathers who were not consulted. And at the center of it, according to the records, a man named Gerald Wick, who had operated a private adoption agency in Ogden, Utah, that was never licensed and never inspected. Gerald Wick had died in 2003. He was beyond the reach of consequences, but the records were not. This is where the story turns, and it turns in a direction Caleb did not anticipate. He had expected to feel vindicated. He had expected the anger he carried, the quiet, corrosive anger of a boy put on a bus and forgotten, to transform into something righteous. Instead, he felt hollow. The FBI agents documented the railcars for weeks. Television crews appeared on the road, their satellite dishes visible from the trailer. A reporter from the Casper Star-Tribune called his phone 11 times. He did not answer. He sat in his uncle's ruined trailer, which he had started cleaning by then, pulling out rat nests and sweeping the floor with a broom he bought at the Dollar General for $3.50. The work calmed him, peeling rotted linoleum, scraping mold off window frames, replacing a section of wall where the insulation had turned black and crumbly. He worked with his hands because his hands knew what to do, even when his mind did not. It was during the 3rd week of the investigation that Darla called. His cousin Darla, Wayne's older sister, who had not spoken to Caleb since their grandmother's funeral in 2006, where she had walked past him at the coffee table without acknowledging he was there. Darla called at 9 in the evening, and her voice sounded different from what he remembered. Smaller. "I saw the news," she said. Caleb said nothing. "I didn't know," she said, "about the rail cars. About any of it. Daddy, he never—" She trailed off. Then she said something that surprised him. Daddy used to drive out to that east field every Sunday and just sit in his truck for an hour. Mama thought he was drinking out there. I thought he was just being weird. But he was sitting on top of it. He was sitting on top of what he knew. Caleb asked her why Macon had never gone to the police. Darla was quiet for a long time. "Because he helped dig the holes," she finally said. Back in the 80s, Wick paid him. Daddy was in debt. The ranch was going under. He didn't know what was in them, not at first. Wick told him they were surplus military supplies. By the time Daddy figured it out, he was in too deep. He spent the rest of his life being ashamed. That was the unexpected moment. Not forgiveness, not redemption, just a man who had helped bury evidence of something terrible, who had spent 30 years driving to the site every Sunday and sitting with what he had done, and who, in his final act, had pointed his nephew toward the truth he himself had never been brave enough to speak. Caleb did not forgive Uncle Macon. He did not hate him either. He held both things at once, the way you hold a cup of coffee that is too hot, knowing it will cool but feeling the burn right now. Weeks passed. The FBI finished their initial excavation. Agent Chen told Caleb that the records had already led to the identification of 23 individuals who had been moved through the pipeline as children. Some were in their 40s now. Some had been told their parents were dead. Some had been told their parents did not want them. 23 people whose lives had been rearranged by a man with a filing cabinet and a freight manifest. Caleb was number 24. He did not move off the property. The back taxes, it turned out, were waived by the county after the FBI involvement drew attention. A local contractor named Ray Salinas, a quiet man with forearms like bridge cable, showed up one morning without being asked and started patching the trailer roof. When Caleb asked him why, Ray shrugged and said, "Heard about what's out here. Figured you could use a roof that doesn't leak." He did not ask for money. He worked for 3 days and drank black coffee from a thermos and talked about the Denver Broncos and said nothing about the railcars. Others followed. A woman named Jessie, who ran a small engine repair shop, brought a generator. A retired teacher named Booth brought a box of books, paperbacks mostly, westerns and thrillers with cracked spines. The owner of the hardware store in Riverton let Caleb run a tab without asking for credit history. These were not grand gestures. They were specific, practical, and offered without ceremony. By October, the trailer was livable, not beautiful. The walls were mismatched where Caleb had replaced sections. The kitchen floor sloped slightly to the east. The bathroom door did not close all the way, and the hot water heater made a ticking sound every 40 seconds, like a metronome set to the tempo of something patient. But it was dry and warm and his. He built a workbench in the chicken coop, which he had cleared out and reinforced with scrap lumber from a demolished barn 20 miles north. He started doing the thing he had done quietly for years in the county assessor's office, where no one was watching and the phone was not ringing. He carved, small figures mostly, animals. He liked making birds from scraps of juniper and pine, whittling them down with a pocket knife until their wings had the suggestion of feathers without the fussiness of realism. He had never told anyone about this. It had felt too small to mention. A private habit, like humming. Ray Salinas saw the birds one afternoon and picked one up without asking, turning it in his thick fingers. "You sell these," he said. Caleb said, "No." Ray set it down carefully and said, "You should." He did not sell them, but he started leaving them on the fence posts along the road. 1 a week, then 2. Small juniper birds with their wings spread, perched on cedar posts, facing the Wind River Range. People noticed. Some took them. Some left them. A woman who drove past on her way to work every morning stopped one day and told him her daughter had taken one to school for show and tell and called it a wind bird. Caleb liked that. Wind birds. It was November when Agent Chen called for the last time. She told him that 11 of the 24 identified individuals had agreed to participate in a federal investigation into the remaining members of Wick's network. 3 former associates had been arrested in Utah and Colorado. She also told him something she did not have to tell him. His mother, Ruth Wren, had received $200 for his transport. It was recorded in the ledger. $200, paid in cash, entered in the precise handwriting of an accountant who treated children like inventory. $200. The number sat in Caleb's chest like a stone. Not because it was shocking, but because it was so small. He had been worth exactly $200 to the woman who carried him for 9 months. Less than a set of used tires, less than the back taxes on 40 acres of scrubland. He thanked Agent Chen. He hung up. He walked out to the east field, where the excavation sites had been filled back in, the earth freshly mounded and already sprouting cheatgrass. The sun was setting behind the Wind River Range, turning the peaks the color of a bruise, purple shading to yellow at the edges. The air smelled like cold sage and coming snow. He could hear the highway in the distance, the long Doppler moan of a semi-truck heading west, and closer, the dry rattle of grass stems touching in the wind. He stood where the first railcar had been. The ground was soft under his boots. Somewhere beneath him, the impression of that steel box remained in the earth, a ghost shape, a mold of absence. He thought about the other children, the ones listed as sparrows and finches and bluebirds. He wondered if any of them had stood in a field like this and tried to feel something that made sense. He did not feel closure. He did not feel healed. He felt the wind on his face and the cold coming into his fingers and the particular ache of standing still for a long time in a body that was tired. He felt like a man standing on the ground that had been dug up and filled back in, which is exactly what he was. The next morning, Caleb drove the flatbed to the hardware store and bought a 4x8 sheet of plywood and a quart of exterior paint, barn red. He brought it back to the property and cut it into a rectangle, 3 feet by 2 feet. He painted it that afternoon, sitting on the tailgate with a brush, watching the red go on thick and glossy over the raw wood. When it dried, he took a wood-burning tool he had found in Uncle Macon's workbench and burned 5 words into the surface in careful block letters. He drove a post into the ground at the entrance to the property, where the old driveway met the county road. He bolted the sign to the post. It faced the road so anyone driving past could read it. The sign said, "You were not freight." He went inside and made coffee. The hot water heater ticked. A moth bounced against the window screen, trying to reach the lamp. Outside, the first snow of the season was starting to fall. Small, dry flakes that disappeared the moment they touched the ground, and the red sign at the end of the driveway stood in the gray light, saying what it said to whoever might need to hear it, to 23 strangers scattered across 5 states, to the ghosts of children listed on cargo manifests, to the 9-year-old boy who'd been put on a bus in Rock Springs with a $20 bill and an envelope, and who had somehow 30 years later found his way back to the place where the evidence was buried, not to retrieve his worth, but to stand on the ground and declare it. The snow kept falling. Caleb drank his coffee. The moth kept trying for the light.